Nerds and nerdettes, brothers and sisters, and all the others, it's Wednesday morning. It's time for Ask Chuck Dixon, where you, the viewer or the listener, get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. So let's get to the first question. Andrew Schweitzer. I was going through my comic collection and saw that you had written an issue of Batman Gotham Adventures, the tie-in comic to the Batman animated series that was on at the time. How did you manage to get this gig? Were there any differences in the way that you would normally write a standard Batman comic, and why didn't you do more? Well, I didn't do more because I was really busy. I was writing 4 monthly titles at DC, plus graphic novels and specials and annuals and inventory issues and all the rest. And how I got the gig was the editors always asked me if I wanted to write any of these. You know, if you have any ideas, if you have this and the Superman book, animated book, which I never did write one of them. So they, you know, and these were all one and done stories, but I never came up with any that I couldn't also use in my regular Batman, you know, DC Comics canon books. And I thought, well, let me think of one that I could only tell through, that would only happen in the animated universe. And at the time, Harley and Poison Ivy in the animated universe were gal pals. In the regular comics, I don't know if they had ever even met. And I'd never written Harley before. And then the added attraction was they said that Joe Staton will draw it. Well, okay, you had me at Joe Staton. So I came up with this story that could only happen in the animated universe. And I think it's the only time I wrote Harley. Now, I'm going to get a million comments going, no, you wrote Harley 6 other times. Okay, I've written a lot of comics. I can't remember them all. I'm sorry. But yeah, it was fun, and working with Joe was fun. I always love working with Joe. Joe's one of the first comic book pros that I spent a lot of time talking to when I was a fan. He likes talking to fans, and amiable guy with a wealth of comic book knowledge. I would, you know, if I ever saw him at a con, I would stop by and spend some time talking to him. And of course, once I got into the business, one of my personal goals was to work with Joe as often as possible. And you know, I either recommended him a lot of times we worked together, or I readily agreed to do projects that he was already attached to, because it's Joe. Love working with Joe. Longtime fan. Now, my only other contribution to the Batman animated comics was a pinup for one of the annuals. Here, this is my pencils, inked by Rick Burchett, who fixed all of my perspective, and obviously did a marvelous job spotting blacks and doing all those amazing things that the Jedi Masters, who are comic book inkers, do to make the artwork better. And Rick Taylor, the wonderful Rick Taylor on color, and you know, it's the only example published example you'll find of me drawing anything related to Batman. Next question, Creeper Weirdo. Do you like pulps like The Shadow, Zorro, Doc Savage, or their comic book counterparts like Rocketeer or The Phantom? Yeah, when I was in like junior high and going into high school, the pulps novels began to appear in paperback form. And I was first attracted to them by the Jim Steranko covers. So I started reading The Shadow. And I had met the creator of The Shadow, as I described in an earlier video. I met Mr. Gibson, and Maxwell Grant was a house name, and which sparked my interest even more, because he suggested, you know, a number of novels, even telling me that the Romanoff Jewels, one of the ones pictured here, was his personal favorite of all the ones he had written, and I read it, and it's good. It's a good story. I like The Shadow. It's got a dense continuity. I like the supporting cast, and I read quite a few of these, because the paperback companies were, you know, eager to print them because they were already established, no deadlines. These books were, you know, 30 or more years old at this point, 30 or 40 years old at this point. But they did a lot of them, so people must have picked them up, you know, either through nostalgia or, you know, I knew a lot of kids when I was in school who read these avidly. And, well, of course, the success of Doc Savage, which I could never get into Doc Savage, I'm sorry. Sorry, Mr. Nolan. Graham Nolan's a huge Doc Savage fan. I just couldn't see it. Another one I followed, and primarily because the Jim Steranko cover sucked me in. This is the way you bought paperbacks back then. Ooh, that's got a great cover. And that would draw you into the book. which was the purpose of the great cover. These I really enjoyed. I enjoyed them even more than The Shadow or any of the other pulp reprints. G8 and his Battle Aces. They were written by Robert J. Hogan, who was unusual because he used his own name. He wasn't a house name. And he wrote every single G8 and his Battle Aces pulp novel for 15 years. Every month for 15 years, this guy cranked out, aviation action set in the skies above World War I France. And the stories are wacky. Apparently, according to Hogan, the Kaiser employed more mad scientists than he did soldiers, because every story has some wackadoo mad scientist back in Berlin or wherever, creating some horrible, monstrous, awful fate for the Allies in the trenches, and only G8 and his pals can fly in and rescue Western Europe from the Hun. What separates these from a lot of pulps is that Robert J. Hogan was a World War I pilot. He didn't go to combat. Unfortunately, he got out of training school too late to actually get to France. But he did fly these planes and fire the guns and practice and do all the combat practice. So when he wrote about these things, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was writing about. More importantly, he was able to impart his own experiences very vividly. I didn't read these things for the plots. I read them for for Hogan's ability to put you in the cockpit and make you feel like you're there with G8, and describing all the sensations and sights and sounds and smells of being in aviation combat. He's very good, and I mean, no wonder this pulp magazine, which lasted 4 times longer than America, well, even more. It lasted like 7 times longer than America's involvement in World War I. It's not hard to figure out once you read a couple why they were so popular, why they had such a loyal following amongst magazine buyers at the time. It's just good stuff. Another one I read quite a bit of was The Spider, and The Spider is kind of a Shadow knockoff, although in the books he doesn't really look like the character on this cover. I like The Spider because although his ensemble cast wasn't as interesting as the Shadows, his methods were far more direct. And he was really big. He was like Frank Castle. He was real big into making sure no bad guys escaped alive. He was a real no prisoners kind of pulp hero. Very, very direct, very nasty, very mean, and scary. You got the idea this guy might be completely and utterly freaking crazy. And that's what made these stories work. And as in all of these pulps, the bad guys are, beyond lurid, which makes it so much fun. And of course, I got into Edgar Rice Burroughs through the Pellucidar novels and then the Mars novels, and eventually I read all the Tarzan novels because these are all readily available in paperback. I can't think of a drugstore, paperback store, or newsstand that you didn't go to and they didn't have Tarzan novels, which to me indicates these must have sold like a house of fire. A lot of kids I knew growing up read these, and Tarzan was a mainstay for me. And, a lot of people forget Tarzan was a pulp character. He didn't appear in the slicks. He appeared in the higher end pulp magazines, but they were still pulp magazines. It was still lowbrow entertainment, and I'm all about the lowbrow entertainment. Now, I've written a little bit of Tarzan, which I've discussed before, but I also got to write some Spider. Moonstone did an anthology of Spider stories, new Spider stories, and they asked me to contribute. And I thought, hey, I'd love to do this. But I want to do a different take. I didn't just want to do a straight-up pulp adventure, all purple prose and everything else. And at the time, I had been reading a few novels and short stories by a writer named Dawn Powell. And Dawn Powell wrote at the time, in the 1930s, about New York high society. And I thought, well, let me put on my highfalutin, pretentious auteur hat and write a Spider story in the style of Dawn Powell. And I don't know if I was successful or not, but I had a lot of fun doing it. So it's got everything that a Spider story should have. It's got a horrible villain and a grisly fate for the victims that he either will or will not rescue. And of course, the bad guy gets his comeuppance in the end. At the business end of a pair of blazing 45s. So it has all the elements of a pulp story, but I approached it from a different literary style, just for fun. just to see if I could do it. And I felt personally it was successful. I don't know how you would feel about it. But it's from the good folks at Moonstone, and I believe it's still in print. You can probably find copies of this somewhere on eBay or Amazon if you're at all interested in my own approach to pulp fiction. And G8, I got the team, again, thanks to the folks at Moonstone, I got the team G8 with the Golden Age Airboy in a story in which I brought back the Batstaffel, which was these gigantic bats from the G8 pulp series. Probably my favorite G8 novel, called the Batstaffel. Once again, a mad scientist creates a species of enormous King Kong-sized bats to attack Allied aviation. And when everybody at Moonstone, Joe Gentili, for the most part, the head honcho at Moonstone, said, would you like to team Airboy and G8? Because they're both aviation characters. I was like, yeah, when do I start? And I had free reign of everything G8, so I thought, well, they got to meet the Batstaffel. It's so perfect for G8 to meet the Batstaffel once again, and a bunch of giant bats is perfect adversaries for Airboy, who faced a lot of like monstrous horror-themed bad guys like that, threats like that, and also flies a plane, which, you know, motivates along using bat wings. So, well, geez, the imagery here is awesome. And Ken Hoover knocked it out of the park. I thought it was a fun project to work on. Again, you can probably get it from Moonstone or find it, you know, cheap on eBay if you're interested. Romu HQ. Hello, Mr. Dixon. George R. Martin. I think he has 2 R's in his name. I think the second R stands for royalties. George R. R. Martin once said that there are 2 kinds of writers: the architect, who always plan the whole story ahead; there's the gardener, who plants their plots and characters and let them grow naturally by themselves. I wonder which of those kinds you are. Thank you for your incredible work. Well, thank you for the kind words. Look, when people say there's 2 kinds of anything in the world, don't listen to them. It's never just 2 kinds of anything. It's the human race, especially when you're dealing with a product of the human mind, which is what writing is. And it's the product of a particular part of the human mind, the imagination, which is limitless. It's boundless. So there's not 2 kinds. There's many ways to approach the writer's quote-unquote process. There's as many ways to write a story as there are people who want to write a story. Now, which kind of writer am I, or what kind of writer am I? I'm a little bit of architect. I'm a little bit of gardener. It depends on the story. When I write my Bad Times novels, my time travel stories, they're what I call my toy soldier stories. So I take my cast of characters and I move them through a series of historical events that, you know, I've made up. You know, and a lot of times I'm not clear where I'm going. I just have a high concept and a general idea of where the book's going to end. But I just set everything in motion and I go for it. So that's gardening. The Levon Cade novels, I'll do chapter breakdowns and things like that. I'll do, you know, a rudimentary outline, if you could call it that. It's basically just write down the chapter numbers and some hastily scribbled notes to just sort of make sure I got a story before I start. So it's not really an architect. You wouldn't want to build a house based on my architect drawings, done in the style of Levon Cade outlines. But so I'm a little bit of both, but mostly I'm a big scene guy. Raymond Chandler was a big scene guy, although he didn't worry about plot as much as I do. Chandler would come up with, you know, 3 good scenes, and then, you know, just letting his imagination roam, and then figure out a way to get Phil Marlowe to those scenes, and so that they had emotional impact to the story, so that they happened in a logical way. They didn't seem contrived, and he succeeded in all of them, except in the end his plots were a mess. But you enjoyed reading it. You enjoyed being along for the ride because, you know, the writing is just so skilled and funny and clever. And, you know, his pacing was terrific. Even if he was going nowhere, the pacing was great. Now, a guy I know who is primarily a gardener type is Larry Hama. Larry believes in his characters so much. He builds them in his mind until they're real people, and that he just sends them out there in the world. He creates a complication for them, and then they overcome it. Now, he worries about plot, and he worries about story structure. I mean, Larry knows all that stuff, character development, how to build the scene, and all the rest of it. But he's pretty much, just let it fly, and that's the way he enjoys working. And the end result, look at the characters he created. People love those characters. They love G.I. Joe. So he's right to have a lot of faith that those characters can carry a story. And he comes up with, wacky, crazy stuff. And I think that's how he keeps it fresh in his mind. He's not getting bored because he's not plotting it all out ahead of time. Now, a writer that I know who's very much an architect, from discussions with him, is John Ostrander. John Ostrander will lay out his whole story, every event. He'll know exactly where he's going. But John Ostrander is a big world builder. And if you're going to build anything, you need architectural plans. And he's very much aware of that. John will even do very, very detailed full biographies of all of his characters, even if little or none of that information will actually end up in the story. He feels that it gives him a better understanding of the character. That's how he makes the character real in his mind. I don't ever do that. I just sort of blue sky it. I just sort of like, okay, I think I got a handle on this character. I like this character. I understand what they would do and what they wouldn't do. But, John, and it just depends on who you are and what kind of person you are, the elements used. But you can, do all of those things, architect, gardening, making it up as you go along, just blue skying, writing the story like poetry. As P.G. Wodehouse said, his writing was a musical comedy without the music. So there's just so many different ways to do it. And then sometimes a story just comes to you whole. I've had that. When that does, it's just, if you didn't believe in God before then, you do afterwards. Because it's like, the whole story comes to me like a bolt out of the blue. I have a mini-series coming up next year from Antarctic that I co-wrote with Scott Beatty called Unprepped. And the plot line of this 6-issue mini-series came to me all at once. It was like within 10 minutes of hastily scribbled notes, I had the whole thing down. The basic bones of the story. I knew how it was going to end. I knew how it was going to begin. I knew the character relationships. I knew everything going in. And then I brought Scott Beatty in to, make sure I wasn't crazy. And we did our, back and forth organic, I'm going to write you into a corner kind of writing, which is a different process. I'd write him into a corner. He'd write me into a corner. And we, work through it that way. Very organic process. So again, there's yet another way of working. And, but that's rare. The Nam 66, issue number 66, which I mention often, came to me like in a fever dream. Like kaboom, I've got this whole story. And I sat down and wrote 22 pages in one sitting. I didn't get up till it was done. I couldn't. I was just drawn into my own little freaky world that I thought of. But the whole story came to me. I knew everything that was going to happen in that story before I laid it down, which is unusual. It's very unusual. If there's a writer out there who writes like that all the time, God bless you, man. You are the luckiest person on earth, because most of the time I'm sitting here sweating. And, I realize I've written a lot, but every story you go into is like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this anymore. So there you go. Don't trust people who say there are just two kinds of anything. There's not just vanilla and chocolate. But that's, there you go. And for all of you would-be writers out there, don't think that there's some sort of, there's only two methods, or there's a true way, or there's a secret, or anything else. The only secret to writing is to just start writing. Just start writing, and then you rewrite. But just get a bunch of material down. Just start writing, just start telling your story. Even if it sucks, at least you've got some clay there to mold. You can go back and rewrite it and change it and see what you did wrong. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's the same as an artist. You're going to have a lot of crappy drawings behind you before you get better. It's the same with writing. And so don't get hung up on how-tos and processes and other authors' advice. Here I am, an author giving you advice. But my advice is to ignore all the advice and just start writing. Just start telling your story. Even if you've never written before and you have a story to tell, well, you have a story to tell. So tell it. Whatever way you can, whatever way suits your abilities or intent. Mr. Entertainment, they call him Mr. Entertainment. Do you think the Marvel and DC intellectual properties should go into public domain? Well, I know I rail against the work for hire and the abuses that both comic book companies have heaped on freelancers for decades since their creation. But I also believe in the rule of law, and Marvel Comics and DC Comics have done their due diligence, and they own the copyright and they own the trademark to these characters. And even though both companies seem to be in a suicide pact, they seem to have joined hands to jump into a volcano to destroy a lot of their franchises. They still belong to them. They can do what they want with them. And even though, both of these companies were built by, people like me and others who were work for hire, working piecemeal, working piecework, we knew going in these characters don't belong to us. And the thing is, if you think these characters are going in a weird way now, imagine the anarchy if all of these characters went public domain. I mean, the weird, crazy stuff you would see then. That would be the end of these characters. I realize that the people at Marvel and DC are not necessarily the best stewards for these characters right now, but there's always a chance new people will come in, some grown-ups will take over and take the wheel, and they'll improve. But if these went public domain and anybody could do stories about Spider-Man or Wolverine or Superman or Wonder Woman, that would be the end of those franchises, because they would be destroyed by people who were pursuing their own even weirder agendas than what's going on now. They would hollow the characters out, basically. Daniel Jackowitz. I actually never really liked Watchmen. It's very high quality, but it's not a story I like reading. Now, I realize this isn't a question, it's a statement, but I can't resist reacting to it. I agree with you 100%, 110%, if that's possible. Watchmen is a tremendous technical achievement. It's masterful piece of storytelling, both in the writing and the art. But I don't like it. I never reread it. I mean, I have it in my collection. I think everybody has it in their collection. If you have a comic collection, you've got Watchmen. I like to look at it, but I don't like to read it. It's an unpleasant, nihilistic story that just doesn't go along with my worldview. I also think it takes superheroes into a very weird place. Kind of drove the whole superhero genre into the ditch, which Alan Moore says was not his intention. Alan Moore was simply indulging himself when he wrote Watchmen and hoping others would enjoy it. Obviously, millions have. But end result is superheroes are now some sort of weird fetishistic, part of the subculture. As popular as they are in movies and TV, it gets weird. It gets weird when you take something like Watchmen into the other media. And if I didn't like the comic, if I didn't enjoy the comic, I like the comic for what it is. I didn't enjoy the comic. The movie I liked even less. I only made it 20 minutes in. Once you see that phony baloney looking Richard Nixon, I realized, okay, this movie's just going to tie together every left-wing conspiracy trope imaginable. It's going to be like a Brian Stelter fever dream for the next 2.5 hours. So I'm out. I can't handle it. And the other thing that disturbed me was, seeing these characters in real life. If you saw these characters walking down the street, you'd assume there was a comic book convention in town, or they were heading to some sort of meeting of sadomasochists somewhere in a dungeon. This is where you move. This is what Watchmen did. It moved superheroes from, childish wish fulfillment fantasy to sort of fetishist entertainment. And it's like, who wants to see this? And apparently with the movie, no one. I don't know how well the TV series is doing or not doing. It's streaming, so who knows? Only HBO Max knows the numbers on this show. If they don't renew it, we'll know it failed. And at this point, maybe it's already over. I was at a panel at a comic convention once and gave these opinions out. And a guy in the audience said, well, people didn't understand the Watchmen movie. That's why it didn't do well, because the movie did not do well. And I said, no, they understood it. They decided they didn't like it. You can't you can't say that everybody who doesn't like something doesn't understand it. If you don't like James Bond movies, it's like, okay, I can understand why somebody wouldn't. I can understand why some people don't like Westerns. I love Westerns. I can understand why some people don't. You got to leave a little room here. Everybody who disagrees with you isn't a moron. But who does like this kind of stuff? Who does generally like Alan Moore's writing? This is nothing against Alan Moore. He's an amazing writer, amazing talent. What a mind. I always joke that Alan Moore's biggest fans are first-year philosophy majors after they've had their first shot. But in reality, it's more like crossword puzzle aficionados. If you've ever done a crossword puzzle, part of it is fun. You're filling in the words, and the more words you fill in, the more clues you provide yourself. But the real joy in doing a crossword puzzle, if any of us were willing to admit it is that you congratulate yourself for getting the clues. Now, if you do a lot of crossword puzzles, I do the Wall Street Journal puzzle every day. This is about Alan Moore. Trust me, I'm getting back there. I do the Wall Street Journal puzzle every day, and I've gotten to know the different puzzle creators because they credit them. And I'll go, oh, this guy, I have nothing culturally in common with this guy. So he's going to have all his clues are going to be about Broadway shows and college basketball, and I'm not going to get any of them because I'm just, our Venn diagram doesn't meet anywhere. So only if I'm lucky on the generic clues am I ever going to fill out this whole puzzle. And then other guys, I go, oh yeah, this guy must be around my same age and have my same interests because he's always, I know, there's gonna be a Sylvester Stallone clue in here, or something that I'm familiar with, and so when you get the clue, and a lot of them are very clever, they're puns or whatever. When you get that really tough one, you congratulate yourself. You're like, oh, I got that cultural reference. I understood what he was talking about, and you pat yourself on the back. Well, that's what a lot of Alan Moore readers do because he leaves so many. His depth of knowledge on arcane literature, ancient religions, philosophy, all the rest of it is deep. And he throws that stuff out, plus comic book stuff, comic book continuity. Big comic book fan. So he throws all this stuff into the stories. And, on something like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I'm guilty of it myself. I'll be reading and go, oh, I got that reference. Oh, I know that. I know that character, even when he doesn't name them. I figured out what, this is funny because this is a joke he's thrown in here. He's sort of hidden in here. And you congratulate yourself and you feel smarter than you actually are. Because I'm not classically educated. I've read some Victorian literature, but not all of it. I don't have the depth of knowledge that Alan Moore does. So when I do, when our Venn diagrams do cross, I feel good about it. And I think that's what it's all about for Alan Moore. He makes his readers feel smarter than they are or more educated than they are. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not putting that down. That's a neat trick that you can impart your own personality, your own psyche into the stories that directly and then have the readers respond to them. Alan Moore creates a rapport with his readers by doing that. And that's genius. And whether he's writing mainstream superhero stuff, which he hasn't written in a while, or his later, far more disturbing work, you can connect or not connect. I don't connect so much with his later work because I find it unpleasant. But, the early work for DC, including Swamp Thing, you build a rapport. And that's a special thing. And that's not an easy thing to do as a writer, to bring your readers in like that. And he does it. And good for him. I just don't like a lot of his work. I don't enjoy a lot of his work. I recognize the talent. I just don't enjoy it. And then there's some people like Watchmen just because they like Watchmen. Because they wanted to see superheroes grow up or whatever wish fulfillment fantasy they had is satisfied by Watchmen. Luis Too Much Analyzes Comics. I love that. I remember you saying in an earlier episode, and you somewhat brought it up again, that DC pushed Killing Joke, Watchmen, and Dark Knight Returns as untouchable stories that could not be surpassed. You've said that you thought there were many stories that came out later that you would consider on par or better. Could you tell us a few that you think qualify, yours included, if you don't feel too bad bragging? Thanks. I'm not going to brag. There's enough, without including my own work, which would be egotistical. The Nail is the first one that always comes to mind. It's by Alan Davis and Mark Farmer. Alan Davis wrote and drew this. Mark Farmer inked it. And it's a hell of a read. Now, is it groundbreaking? Does it deconstruct the characters? No. And that's what's good about it. It works within the framework of a classic Justice League of America story, and it just throws in everything. And Alan Davis's understanding of these characters and how to bring out their coolness factor in all of them, how to keep the story moving. There's humor, there's action, there's tons of continuity, Easter eggs, and if you like these characters, you're going to love this interpretation of it. Now, why this book isn't always in print? Because it's practically a DC 101 for the classic iconic characters. This is the kind of book you would hand a kid who said, oh, I like Batman, or I like Superman, or I might want to read a comic book. And you hand them this, they're going to be a DC fan for life, because this is such a good representation of the entire DC universe. This and its sequel. The sequel is every bit as good as the original, and it's a fun read. It's pure escapist entertainment. It's not trying to pretend to be literature. It's not trying to be a milestone in comics, but I believe it is, because it's the perfect distillation of this franchise, the Justice League franchise, especially with all the attention with the Justice League movies and everything else. There's no reason why this book shouldn't always be in print and never be out of print. And moves us on to the next one. Superman the Dark Side was a miniseries, prestige miniseries, another one that should be in print more often, should see the light of day. It was written by John Francis Moore, who's a criminally underrated comic book writer. I never read a Moore story that didn't exceed my expectations. He knows his subject matter, and here he writes a terrific Superman story as well as a terrific Kirby Fourth World story. The concept is as simple as can be. Little Kal-El, as a baby, does not land on Earth. He lands on Apokolips, becomes the adopted son of Darkseid. Moore here is joined by Kieran Dwyer, who I've worked with myself. Always a delight to work with. Kieran, he perfectly represents the Superman universe, which he was experienced in drawing. Perfect representation of everything Kirby without aping Kirby. It's his own interpretation, but very true to the original characterizations. And Hilary Barta, my buddy Hilary Barta, on the inks. Dwyer and Barta together, perfect marriage, especially on anything involving Kirby. Barta, he brings really muscular inks to this. He's true to Dwyer's, very detailed pencils, but he brings his own inimitable, cartoon quality, and I mean cartoons in the best sense of the word. Hilary is an underrated inker as well. For that matter, Kieran Dwyer is an underrated as a comic artist. He's amazingly talented. A guy, again, like John Francis Moore, who always exceeds your expectations. Another one is a crossover. Crossovers are generally considered, throwaway. They're not really looked upon as classic comics. They're like gimmicks. This one isn't. Superman Aliens by Dan Jurgens and Kevin Nolan is a classic. It's a classic Alien story. It's a classic Superman story. It's a perfect crossover because it brings out the best in both sets of characters, the best in both franchises. Tells a story with lots of twists and turns, lots of emotional catharsis, lots of heart, moves like a bullet. And I don't like most Alien comics because I think they get it wrong. Dan gets it right. And obviously he gets Superman right. And he's abetted by, Kevin Nolan, who takes Jurgens' muscular storytelling and, terrific draftsmanship to a whole new level because Kevin Nolan is Kevin Nolan. And it is just a heck of a story. I was asked at one point to write a sequel to this. Dan was too busy on his work, and they wanted a sequel because this sold very well. And I said, I can't follow what Dan did. I don't want to touch what Dan did. I love what Dan did so much that no one should ever touch it. Just leave this story alone. I said, I would, however, love to have Superman Aliens in a story set on Apokolips, set in the Kirbyverse. And they already had John Bogdanov lined up as artist and Kevin Nolan on inks again. I said, well, this is obviously the way we should go. We should go with Bogdanov's complete immersion that he'd already done himself in the Kirbyverse, in the Fourth World, and just run with it. And it was some of the most fun I've ever had working in comics was doing Superman Aliens 2. But I didn't want to touch Dan's stuff because I think Dan's stuff is classic and deserves, like the others I've mentioned, to be in print, if not constantly, then at least in print more often, because audiences, comic book readers who aren't aware of them, are missing out on these excellent projects that kind of, exist in the shadow that DC created over all the work that came after Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns. Now, another one. This is a single issue. But this is a classic. This is an issue that needs more attention. Kelly Puckett wrote this, another underrated writer who deserves a lot more attention. It's a flashback issue. It's Legends of the DC Universe number 6. It's Dick Grayson's first time spent with Superman. He spends a day with Superman, and it's a guy bonding story. It's a kid meeting the greatest uncle a kid could ever have, and they have an adventure, and it's all very compelling and interesting and humorous, and there's everything. It's got everything but the kitchen sink in it. It's just a terrific story, moves like a bullet, but it's Kelly Puckett's usual excellent work. But what really elevates it is the final page. The final page brings it all into focus. The final page has a moment that's one of those, I was delighted, I was shocked, I was envious, because I thought, why didn't I ever think of this? It kind of marks my whole Batman run. We were dealing with the animated guys and dealing with other writers, and we're all deep into the Batman mythos. And you see some guy come up with a new twist, a new turn that works within the Batman reality, and you go, why didn't I think of that? You're admiring them, and you're jealous as hell all at the same time. So yeah, this if you can find this issue, it's astounding what Kelly accomplishes here, and I've embarrassed him more than once in person, going on and on about how what a work of genius I thought this issue was, and that's the whole thing is, DC, as I mentioned in other videos, by putting Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, Killing Joke, like saying that this is the high tide, this is the best we'll ever do. I mean, how does that make any sense from a term of marketing? Does General Motors bring out a car and say this is the best car we'll ever produce? Every model year after this is going to be complete junk. And then keep reminding people over the years that, yeah, that's the best Chevy that ever was. Now, fans might say that, but shouldn't say that as a company. Because, okay, you love the Watchmen, you might kind of, waste some time with this. And it was frustrating because I would deal with it in the offices, talking to marketing, and, you get things like, well, this is no Dark Knight Returns, or this is no Watchmen. Well, you don't know that. And every one of the projects that I just listed is the equal in quality and craftsmanship and entertainment value of the books that DC Comics considers their high points. I think they're every bit as good, and I like them better because they're not dark and dismal and depressing. Do comics always have to make us feel bad? Eric Marin, do you have any recommendations for pirate fiction novels? Well, as it happens, I do. Raphael Sabatini. I'm not going to go all the way back to Robert Louis Stevenson. We all know that. Raphael Sabatini was a writer. He wrote for the Slick magazines. He wrote novels, and a highly regarded novelist, best-selling novelist, back in the early part of the 20th century. And among all of the period swashbucklers he wrote, like Scaramouche and others set in the French Revolution and set in the English court, he wrote two terrific, iconic pirate novels, Captain Blood and The Seahawk, both of which were turned into excellent Errol Flynn movies. And these are rousing, sword-slashing, bodice-ripping, romantic adventures. Captain Blood I read when I was in junior high, basically because the cover looked so good. I told you before, that's how we bought paperbacks. Hey, great cover. And I was familiar with the movie, but the novel Novel knocked me out. Guy writes with a lot of authority. I don't know anything about Raphael Sabatini. I don't know if he actually was a sailor or knew anything about what he was talking about, but it all seemed real to me. And, so I can highly recommend Mr. Sabatini. James L. Nelson, who's obviously really into pirates, I got interested in Nelson when he wrote a series of novels about the American Revolution, the Navy, the beginnings of the American Navy in the American Revolution, and they were excellent. Muscular writing, written with authority. This guy sails in three-masted ships, and he's able to impart that knowledge to landlubbers like me to make it evocative and interesting and exciting. And I love those novels, so I was really, really into it when he wrote a series of pirate books. And these are classic stuff. Broadsides and boarding parties and all the rest of it. The pirate round, a lot of these take place in the Indian Ocean. The pirate rounds historically were the Mughals. The Mughals ruled India in the 1600s and into the 1700s. And they were basically Muslim dictators ruling over. They were the descendants of Genghis Khan, the Mongols, and they converted to Islam. They ruled India for centuries, and they ruled over the majority Hindu populace. And each year they would make a pilgrimage to Mecca. And in doing so, they would leave India, cross the Indian Ocean, to the Arabian Peninsula, usually in enormous ships loaded with gold and silver and gems and slaves and all the rest of it. And this became a rich hunting ground for the pirates of the day, including, the very real Captain Kidd. This is where James L. Nelson sets these novels. Some of it takes place in the Spanish Main, but for me the most fun was the stuff on the African coast and in the Indian Ocean, and just good stuff. And because he's a sailor, he does sail three-masted ships, like Sabatini, well, even more so than Sabatini. He writes with a great deal of authority, but he's able to make everything clear so that people like me can understand what the hell he's talking about. But just good, rousing stuff. I can't recommend them high enough. My favorite pirate novel, though, is this guy only wrote one. Nicholas Griffin. He wrote The Requiem Shark. This is as close to literature as a pirate novel gets. He takes a fresh look at the period. There's a lot of period detail. He spent a lot of time studying the language of the day, the way people talked. It's very much written from the point of view of the period. There's a lot of shocking stuff happens in this book. It's violent and nasty as these days were. It's an accurate, to my mind, an accurate portrayal of what the pirate life was probably mostly like. And it gets pretty grisly and nasty, but it has all the elements of a swashbuckler as well. It's exciting and suspenseful, and the characters are engaging and all the rest of it. So I cannot recommend The Requiem Shark by Nicholas Griffin highly enough, and his other novels. He wrote one about the plague that's excellent. So check out Nicholas Griffin and The Requiem Shark. Hey, if you have suggestions or statements, as Daniel did, you have some artwork you want to show me, you want to contact me and tell me I'm completely full of oatmeal, then contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most direct way to reach me, and I look at it a couple of times a day to see what you're all thinking, and sometimes even directly reply to you. But this is the best way to get your question or statement here on Ask Chuck Dixon and get your name read on the internet. Isn't that fun? Before I let you go, have you checked out My Sister Suprema at Arctoons? My Sister Suprema is about Randy Diaz. He's a little boy. He doesn't like comic books. He loves comic books. But his greatest dream is to be a superhero himself. And when he builds a device and mixes up the chemicals that he finds suggested to him on a mysterious website, he doesn't turn himself into a superhero. As accidental happenstance will have it, he turns his big sister into a superhero. She has no interest in being a superhero, and so it's up to Randy to vicariously live his dreams through his big sister by convincing her to become a costume crime fighter. And he uses comic books as a way of instructing her on how to go about this. It's a parody, it's a comedy. It's by me and Anthony Gonzalez Clark. And like I said, it's available at ArcTunes at archaven.com, which is free. It's high res. New episodes every week. My Sister Suprema is very popular. The audience for it is growing. I'm very, very pleased with the reaction. We're having a lot of fun creating it. If you want to get in on the fun and support us and support all of the things I'm doing at ArcTunes, you can go to Patreon and find the Archaven account. The Archaven account solely funds the artists for my various projects at ArcTunes. This is how I pay the guys that do this absolutely tremendous jaw-dropping artwork that they're doing. And it funds, Go Monster Go. It funds My Sister Suprema. It funds Something Big. It's funding the upcoming Ferocious by myself and Richard Bonk. So go there, and $1, $3, $5 makes a huge difference for us. I mean, if everyone listening to this gave $1, we'd be in great shape for making sure I can pay these artists, and maybe even someday pay myself a couple of bucks here and there. But trust me, right now, this is a labor of love, creating new projects for you to view for free on ArcTunes. So go ahead and check out My Sister Suprema. It's up there now, and by the time you're listening to this or watching this, I imagine there'll be 5 or 6 episodes up at this point. So that's it for me this week. Thanks for listening, as always. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for liking. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the questions. And I'll see everybody down the road.